What if I told you Prince Harry didn't just react to Prince George's new royal title? He exploded, not in a public statement, not in a carefully worded press release, but behind closed doors, in a way so intense that palace staff reportedly had to be briefed for damage control within hours. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because when the news broke that Prince George, just a boy, had been given a historic title long reserved for the monarchy's most favored heirs, while Archie and Lilibet received absolutely nothing, it wasn't just a snub. It was war. For Harry, this wasn't about protocol. It wasn't even about tradition. It was personal. It was betrayal wrapped in royal gold, broadcast to the world like a coronation of one child, and the silent erasure of two others. And behind the velvet curtains and the staged family smiles, the reality was far more brutal. A father watching his children be erased from the very legacy he gave up everything for. But was this really about Archie and Lilibet? Or was it punishment? A cold, calculated move to remind Harry and Meghan what it means to walk away from the throne? The truth? It's far darker than you think. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it feel like to watch your brother's child be honored with the legacy that your own son was denied? To see the cameras flash, the headlines celebrate, and the royal crest stitched onto a future your children are now locked out of? For Prince Harry, it felt like the final slap in the face. Because behind every public smile lies a private sting. And while William stood proudly beside George, smiling for the cameras, Harry sat oceans away, staring at a screen, fists clenched, as his own children were once again erased from history. But here's the twist no one talks about. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a clerical error. This was deliberate. Sources close to the palace say this title for Prince George had been in the works for months, carefully timed, meticulously choreographed, and strategically rolled out to coincide with the king's wider succession plan. And not once, was Archie or Lilibet mentioned in those internal memos, not even as a footnote. Why? Was it because they live in California? Because Meghan isn't a working royal? Or was it, quietly, brutally, about blood, race, and revenge? Because the last time a royal child was denied recognition, it triggered a scandal that nearly cracked the crown. And now, history might just be repeating itself. But what's worse, this time, the child being left out is the son of the man who once swore to protect his mother's legacy. And Harry wasn't going to let that go quietly. Not after what Charles said next. It was a bright, polished morning in London. The kind of day where royal news is supposed to be elegant, predictable, almost ceremonial. But on this particular day, the headlines didn't just trend, they detonated. Prince George officially named Prince of Wales heir to the Duchy of Cornwall, a title rich in history, a designation reserved for those born into the gilded inner circle of royalty. For many, it seemed obvious. Prince George, the eldest son of Prince William, was simply stepping into the role that tradition had mapped out for him since birth. But for others, the announcement hit like a thunderclap. Not because George received a title, no one was questioning his position in the line of succession, but because two names were conspicuously absent from the moment the world was celebrating George's rise. Archie and Lilibet. No mention, no gesture, not even a royal afterthought. And that silence? That's where the rage began. Within hours of the news, Twitter exploded. Hashtags like hashtag where are Archie and Lilibet, hashtag royal snub, and hashtag not my monarchy trended across platforms. Comment sections lit up with outrage. TikTokers broke down the protocol, the history, the contradictions. Was it just tradition? Or was it targeted? But behind the public backlash was something far more raw. A deeply personal wound inside one man who once walked those palace halls. Prince Harry, the former spare. The one who'd sacrificed titles, honors, and royal privilege for a new life, a new truth, and, above all else, his family. And now, the very system he'd fled was doing exactly what he feared most. Erasing his children. Those close to the Sussexes say Harry found out like the rest of us, via a royal press release followed by a social media blitz. There was no phone call, no forewarning, no, just so you know, this is happening. Just a headline, and then the fury. He reportedly stormed out of his office in Montecito. Staff heard shouting. Meghan, trying to calm him, was said to be visibly shaken, not because of George's title, but because she'd warned Harry this day would come. And she was right, because for all the speeches about a modern monarchy, the truth was stark. The Windsor hierarchy was still intact, and it had no intention of including the children of the exiled prince and his American wife. But this wasn't just about exclusion. It was about validation. George's title wasn't simply ceremonial. It came with land, money, and power. The Duchy of Cornwall brings in over £20 million a year. The title's successor is automatically enrolled in the Royal Foundation's legacy-building operations. He gets training, grooming, status, and reverence. In other words, George was officially in, and Archie, officially not. Even more damning, the royal website had quietly updated George's bio that same morning, but still listed Archie and Lilibet with no HRH status, no title, no updates. That wasn't an accident. So the question becomes, why now? Why elevate George in such a public way, right as Harry and Meghan were preparing for a quiet Christmas away from the UK? Some believe it was revenge, a calculated power play by King Charles and Prince William to draw a bright red line between the working royals and the ones they now viewed as liabilities. A way of saying, these are our heirs. Those are your problems. Royal commentator Beatrice Langley described it bluntly. The royal family has chosen its future. Prince George is the monarchy. Archie and Lilibet are the cautionary tale. It's cruel. It's cold. But in palace terms, it's strategy. And this decision didn't emerge in a vacuum. It came after Spare, after Harry and Meghan, after Oprah, after the Netflix docuseries that had palace aides losing sleep and courtiers fielding media firestorms on a weekly basis. So when Charles gave the green light to make George's title public, sources say he did so with a very specific instruction. Make it loud, make it royal, and make it clear. Clear that George was on the path to kingship, and clear that Archie would never even get a seat at the table. But what the king didn't expect was how Harry would respond. Because it wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was personal. This was his son. And suddenly, Harry's silence shattered. He made calls. First to his private team, then to palace representatives. Finally, to his father directly. But the door had already closed. Because what the world didn't know is that this title wasn't just an announcement. It was the final move in a royal chess game that had been months in the making. And Meghan? She wasn't going to let this insult slide. Not again. Because the last time they stayed quiet, their children paid the price. But this time, they were ready to strike back. And what came next would send tremors through the royal walls of Buckingham Palace, exposing not only the truth behind George's title, but the secrets King Charles never wanted made public. Was this just about honoring tradition? Or was there something far more calculated unfolding behind palace doors? Because while the public was busy analyzing George's smile and the polished press photos, few realized this title was no spontaneous gesture. It had been in motion for months. Quietly, secretly, and, some say, with one very clear goal: secure the line of succession and erase the outliers. According to insiders, King Charles had been working behind the scenes since the Queen's death, determined to make his reign slimmer, stronger, and, most telling of all, untainted. And at the center of that blueprint, Prince George, not just as heir to William, but as the royal face of the next century. This wasn't a ceremonial title tossed out for appearances. This was Charles planting a flag in the ground, declaring exactly who mattered in the new monarchy. A monarchy that no longer had patience for rebellion, spectacle, or scandal. And that's where Harry and Meghan no longer fit in. We're told Charles held a series of private meetings with senior aides and constitutional advisors in late summer. The topic? Consolidation. Public trust in the monarchy had dipped. The Netflix fallout had stirred global criticism. And worst of all, polling among young Brits showed rising support for a republic. Charles panicked. He needed stability. And George was his insurance. So when George was granted the honorary responsibilities tied to the Duchy of Cornwall, the moment wasn't just symbolic. It was strategic. George became the youngest face of legitimacy, a photogenic, drama-free, headline-friendly successor. And Charles? He got to make a statement without ever saying a word. That's the genius of the monarchy. Silence is their loudest weapon. But this move came at a cost. You see, in those same discussions, Where George's elevation was plotted, there was also another name on the table, Archie. Not because Charles wanted to reward him, but because he wanted to exclude him, officially. Sources say there was a draft document circulating at Clarence House that would quietly amend certain protocols under the 1917 letters patent, the same law that governs who gets to be a prince or princess. The proposed change? Clarify that only children in active royal service would be eligible for elevation in titles moving forward. A subtle change, but devastating in its intent. And Harry never saw it coming. He had clung to the belief that once Charles became king, Archie and Lilibet would automatically become prince and princess under the original rules set by King George V. But Charles had other plans. Plans that protected George, secured the line, and iced out the exiled branch of the family. And here's where it gets even colder. During one of these royal sessions, Charles reportedly said the quiet part out loud. According to a leak shared with a trusted royal journalist, he told aides, "There must be no ambiguity. We support the future, not the past. Not the breakaways." Breakaways. That's what Archie and Lilibet had become. Not grandchildren. Not even relatives worthy of mention. Just breakaways. And for Charles, clarity wasn't just power, it was preservation. He'd seen how Diana's public image destabilized the firm. He wasn't about to let Meghan do the same. And by extension, he wasn't going to let her children benefit from a crown she helped tear down. Harsh. Absolutely. But strategic? Undeniably. Because the monarchy runs on optics, on symbols, on loyalty. And Charles knew that elevating George while sidelining Archie sent a loud message to the world. We reward those who stay. We forget those who leave. So as the press celebrated George's new ceremonial responsibilities, touring parts of Wales, attending state events alongside his father, no one questioned why Archie, who is older than George's sister Charlotte, was nowhere in the royal narrative. He wasn't omitted by accident. He was erased by design. But here's where things twist even deeper. Because just before George's title was formally announced, Harry had tried to stop it. Multiple sources confirm that Harry reached out to a senior palace aide just days before the news went public. His request was urgent, but calm. He didn't ask for Archie to be given the same title. He simply asked that the announcement be delayed, or at least softened, to avoid inflaming an already fractured situation. The response? Cold, dismissive, almost rehearsed. This decision has already been approved by His Majesty. There will be no changes. Translation? It's happening. Whether you like it or not. And that's when Harry snapped. Because it wasn't just the title. It was the years of slow, silent slights. The family photos without his children. The royal balcony appearances where Archie and Lilibet were conveniently overseas. The speeches, the press releases, the website updates, all echoing the same message. You're not one of us anymore. And this title for George? That was the crown jewel in a campaign of quiet rejection. A campaign Charles had orchestrated with surgical precision. But in doing so, the king had underestimated one thing. Harry wasn't just wounded. He was furious. And when fury and strategy collide, people get desperate. So Harry picked up the phone. Not for an interview. Not for a statement, but for a confrontation, one-on-one, with the man who had just publicly crowned one grandson and buried the other. Is royal blood enough? Or does loyalty now matter more than lineage? That's the question echoing through royal circles and dividing public opinion like never before. Because on paper, the rule was clear. Under the 1917 letters patent issued by King George V, the children and grandchildren of the monarch automatically receive royal titles. That means that once Charles became king, both Archie and Lilibet were eligible to become prince and princess. Simple, right? Wrong. Because just like everything else in the Windsor machine, the rules are elastic. They bend for convenience. They stretch when it suits the image. And sometimes, they're ignored entirely. And that's exactly what happened here. While Prince George's title rollout was hailed as historic, Archie's title status remained frozen. Not denied, not confirmed, just suspended in an ambiguous silence. A silence that felt intentional. So how did we get here? To understand that, we have to go back, way back. The British monarchy has always played favorites. There were children of kings who lived like commoners, royals with full bloodlines who never received a title, and, most disturbingly, biracial descendants who were quietly erased from historical records. Yes, this goes deeper than Meghan, because race and status have always danced awkwardly behind the velvet curtains of Buckingham Palace. And while the firm would never publicly admit it, insiders say the idea of two American-born, Netflix-connected, biracial children holding royal titles made more than a few senior courtiers visibly uncomfortable. Let that sink in, not because Archie and Lilibet weren't qualified, but because they weren't convenient. The monarchy thrives on clean lines, clean narratives, and above all, control. And Meghan? She brought chaos. So when Archie was born, and the palace chose not to give him a title, Meghan and Harry were told it was for his protection. Protection from what? Media intrusion? Or royal legacy? Because fast forward to George's title ceremony, complete with official photographs, state blessings, and glowing commentary, and that excuse no longer held water. Prince George was just as young, just as vulnerable to the press, but he was publicly honored. Meanwhile, Archie was treated like a footnote. And here's the kicker. According to leaked documents reviewed by multiple royal reporters, Charles had the option to offer Archie a title as part of his first King's Honors list. He didn't. Not only that, he reportedly removed their names from preliminary drafts altogether. No prince, no princess, no HRH, no mention. It was as if they didn't exist. And yet, they do. They're part of the bloodline, the grandchildren of the reigning monarch. So what really changed? Many believe the tipping point was spare. Harry's memoir wasn't just an expose. It was a declaration of war. The revelations about Camilla, the strained relationship with William, and the accusations against the palace's press machine stunned the royal institution. And the retaliation? It was slow, but brutal, starting with titles, stripping the Duke and Duchess of Sussex of royal patronages, removing their names from official engagements, excluding their children from coronation documents. One insider said it plainly. The punishment for Harry and Meghan's truth was silence. Silence about their children. Silence about their legacy. Silence that cuts deeper than any press headline ever could. But was it even legal? Some royal experts argue that Charles had no right to override the 1917 letters patent unless he formally amended it through Parliament. But here's the trick. The palace never denied the titles. They simply didn't use them. It was a ghosting strategy. Deny nothing. Acknowledge nothing. And in that silence, Archie and Lilibet were left in royal limbo. Even their birthright felt conditional. Now imagine being Harry, raised in palaces, trained for service, groomed to protect the crown, watching that same institution deny recognition to your own children. Not for anything they did, but for the choices you made. And here's where it gets emotionally devastating. Multiple reports say Harry kept telling friends that everything he endured, the media attacks, the estrangement, the exile, was worth it if his children were treated fairly. He thought walking away would protect them. He never imagined it would make them invisible. So when the palace made George's title official, it wasn't just a political maneuver. It was a message to Harry. You may still be royal, but your children? That's up to us. And for Meghan? This wasn't shocking. It was confirmation. She'd always suspected they'd never be truly accepted. Not fully. Not with her bloodline. Not with her skin. And whether the palace admits it or not, the optics were damning. One child, white, born into the approved branch of the family, celebrated with global fanfare. Two others, mixed race, born in California, excluded without explanation. That's not tradition. That's a message. And Harry heard it loud and clear. But instead of going straight to the media, he went digging. Because if the rules said his children should be royal, but reality said otherwise. Someone, somewhere, had made a decision behind his back. And when Harry found out who, it wasn't just betrayal. It was a name he never expected. Someone he once trusted. Someone who claimed to protect his mother's memory, but who was now rewriting the legacy of his children. And what Harry did next would shock even his closest allies. What does Meghan Markle do when she's pushed to the edge, but can't scream in public? She gets strategic. And then she gets lethal. Because when the announcement about Prince George's title reached Montecito, Meghan didn't cry. She didn't storm out. She didn't post a cryptic quote or a glamorous distraction on Instagram. She walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of wine, and reportedly said just 4 words to Harry. I told you so. Those words weren't cold. They were exhausted. Worn out from years of whispers, gaslighting, snubs, and passive-aggressive protocols designed to keep her children on the outside of a legacy they were born into. But this time was different. This time, it was deliberate. According to a close friend who spoke under condition of anonymity, Meghan's reaction behind closed doors was volcanic. She wasn't shocked that George got a title. She was shocked that Charles and William had the gall to make it so public, so performative, while knowing exactly what they were denying her own children. And worse, no warning, no courtesy, no signal from the palace press office. Just headlines. One friend described it like this. It felt like they were celebrating George's future by erasing Archie's existence. Meghan reportedly slammed her phone on the table and whispered, "They used our children to make a point." Let that sink in, because this wasn't just about favoritism. It was about punishment. A message to Meghan and Harry. Plain and public, stay in your place, or be forgotten. And Meghan? She was done playing nice. Behind the scenes, she immediately reached out to her comms team. Not to release a statement, but to prepare, to document, to archive everything. Every email, every phone call, every omission. The timing of George's announcement. The phrasing. The intentional silence around Archie and Lilibet. Because if war was what they wanted, she was going to bring the receipts. And here's where it gets icy. People often think Meghan is all emotion, all tears and heartache. But in truth, Meghan Markle, the former actress, is also Meghan Markle, the chess player, the strategist, the woman who doesn't just react, she calculates. She reportedly told Harry, "They think we'll lash out. They want us to make noise so they can play the victims again." And instead, she went quiet, but not inactive. She allegedly began preparing a confidential dossier for her legal team, documenting every single incident that could one day form a case of targeted exclusion or even systemic bias within the monarchy. Not for release, not yet, but for leverage. Because Meghan knows something most people forget. Silence is not weakness. Silence is preparation. And while she was building her arsenal, she was also preparing her narrative. One that didn't rely on pity, but on power. Because let's not forget, this is a woman who went from Hollywood sidelines to marrying into the most secretive institution in the Western world, who walked into the lion's den and came out bloodied, but alive. And now, she was fighting not for herself, but for her children. Because if the royal family was willing to erase Archie and Lilibet from history, Meghan was going to make sure the world remembered them louder than ever. And she had a plan. Private sources say she began drafting a memoir, not her own, but one focused entirely on motherhood, legacy, and the unseen struggles of raising royal children in exile. A story not about tiaras and titles, but about identity, displacement, and the quiet heartbreak of knowing your child is royal by blood, but not by recognition. But while Meghan was writing, watching, and waiting, Harry was spiraling. He was pacing, calling, demanding answers. And Meghan knew this was dangerous. Because every time Harry let his emotion override the strategy, they lost. So she made a decision. She stepped back from the chaos. She let Harry take the lead. But she gave him one warning. Don't say anything without thinking 5 years ahead. Because in 5 years, Archie would be old enough to Google, old enough to ask questions, old enough to realize what he wasn't given. And Meghan? She wanted to make sure the record was clear. That Archie and Lilibet didn't lose their place in the royal family because of who they were, but because of who the monarchy chose to become. But even Meghan didn't expect what would happen next. Because while she was privately preparing, Harry was dialing a number no one thought he still had. And on the other end was a voice Meghan hadn't heard in years. One that once called her family. But now, that voice was about to deliver the harshest blow yet. It started with a sigh, not from Harry, but from the voice on the other end of the line. A heavy, almost rehearsed exhale. The kind of breath you take when you know a storm is coming, and you've already decided you won't move an inch. Harry had called his father before, but this time wasn't like the others. This time, it was personal. Not about security, not about Frogmore Cottage, not even about money. This was about his children, and King Charles knew it. The call, according to palace insiders, lasted just under 40 minutes. But the fallout would echo for months. It began with civility. Harry opened the conversation with restrained frustration, asking, directly, why George's title announcement had been made so publicly while Archie and Lilibet were, once again, left out of the royal narrative. King Charles didn't dodge the question, but his answer? Chilling. George is part of the future of the monarchy, Harry. You've chosen a different path. You must understand the consequences. Consequences. That word hit like a slap. Harry fired back, his voice rising. Not in rage, but in disbelief. He reminded his father that blood doesn't change, that his children were still Charles's grandchildren, whether they lived in California or Kensington Palace. But Charles didn't flinch. Titles are not toys, Harry, nor are they weapons. The irony was unbearable, because to Harry, that's exactly what the palace had done, used titles like chess pieces. Crown George. Ignore Archie. Signal who mattered, and who didn't. According to a Montecito source with knowledge of the call, Harry's voice broke mid-conversation. He asked, point blank, whether Charles had ever intended to recognize Archie and Lilibet publicly, or if this erasure had been planned from the beginning. Charles was silent for several beats. Then he allegedly said, "Your children will always be loved, but they are not part of the working royal family." Translation? They are yours, not ours. And that was the breaking point. Harry reportedly told his father, voice cold and clipped, "If you keep rewriting the line of succession to punish me, one day you'll realize you've erased your own legacy." But here's where it gets darker. Because unknown to Harry, he wasn't the only one on the call. Sources from inside Clarence's house confirmed that Queen Camilla was in the room when the conversation took place. Listening, not speaking, but very much present. It wasn't a private father-son conversation. It was a calculated containment effort. Charles wasn't just talking to Harry. He was managing a threat. And behind him, Camilla's presence signaled exactly how tightly this monarchy now closed ranks. Meghan wasn't just unwelcome. She was viewed as a liability. And her children? Collateral damage. Harry, sensing this, reportedly asked, "Is this about protocol, or is it about who their mother is?" Again, silence. And then deflection. Charles shifted the subject to George's growing responsibilities, how the public needed to see stability, how the world was watching. But Harry wasn't having it. The world is watching how you treat your own blood. Don't forget that. Those words lingered in the air. Because here's the unspoken truth. The monarchy doesn't like to be challenged, especially not by one of its own. And Harry, once the lovable, mischievous second son, was no longer an asset. He was a rogue. And rogues get frozen out. The call ended not with a resolution, but with a quiet warning. Charles reportedly said, "I hope you'll reconsider your path, Harry, before there's nothing left to repair." That wasn't fatherly concern. That was a final line in the sand. And Harry? He hung up, slowly, staring at the phone like it had betrayed him. Because in that moment, he understood something devastating. This wasn't just about his children's titles. It was about legacy, bloodline, control. And the crown had already decided who belonged and who didn't. But the real shock? That conversation wasn't contained to those walls. Because what happened next would blow the story wide open. And the leak didn't come from Meghan, or Harry, or even the tabloids. It came from inside the palace, from someone who had heard it all, and was no longer willing to stay silent. Leaks from inside the royal family don't happen by accident. They're not slips of the tongue. They're not careless whispers in candlelit corridors. They are calculated detonations, tactical explosions wrapped in anonymous quotes and unnamed sources. And this one was nuclear. Just 48 hours after Prince Harry's tense call with King Charles, the British tabloids lit up with phrases that felt eerily familiar to those who knew the truth. Harry demanded royal titles for his children. King Charles was taken aback by the Duke's tone. Sources claim Meghan pressured Harry into the call. Or had they heard that before? The only people present for the call were Charles, Camilla, and one top-level aide tasked with taking notes for the royal archive. And somehow, those notes had leaked. Why? Because the firm was preparing the narrative. Before Harry could go public, before Meghan could shape the message, they would define the story. And the headline they pushed was simple: Harry was acting out. Meghan was behind it. The crown was dignified and above it all. Classic misdirection. But what truly stunned royal watchers wasn't the content of the leak, it was the tone. Every word painted Harry as emotional, entitled, even irrational. Demanded, exploded, accused. Words designed to stir public fatigue. Because if the palace couldn't make people love Charles more, they could at least make them care less about Harry. And here's the kicker. The leak didn't even mention Archie or Lilibet by name. That omission wasn't accidental. It was surgical. By erasing the children from the story, the palace could frame the entire conflict as ego-driven, not protective, not paternal, not just petty. And it worked. For a moment, the tide turned. Commentators on breakfast shows sighed. Why does Harry always make everything about himself? Online forums called Meghan manipulative, obsessed with status, bitter. But then, something shifted. A single quote in a mid-tier newspaper stirred the pot. A quote that hadn't been authorized, that hadn't been cleared. It read, Prince George's title was announced months ahead of schedule after a senior royal pushed to draw a line between the heirs and the exiles. It was buried halfway down the article. No source attached, no elaboration. But royal journalists recognized the phrasing immediately. Draw a line. That exact phrase had reportedly been used in one of Charles's private meetings with his advisors. It wasn't public knowledge, which meant only someone in the room could have leaked it. And now, the story was unraveling. Suddenly, questions flooded the airwaves. Why now? Why elevate George so publicly while freezing out Archie and Lilibet? Was this really about protocol or about punishment? And just like that, the palace's narrative began to crack. Even allies of the monarchy began expressing discomfort. Royal biographer Richard Evans tweeted, Whatever your views on Harry and Meghan, denying children their legacy to settle scores feels deeply unroyal. The damage was done. And inside Buckingham Palace, panic rippled. Because once again, the leak had opened a door, and behind it was a mess they couldn't control. More insiders began whispering. One aide hinted that the George title push had been William's idea, not Charles's. Another claimed that Camilla had urged Charles not to speak to Harry at all. A third revealed that Meghan had never demanded titles, only transparency. And the media? They went wild. Suddenly, this wasn't just a feud. It was a full-blown succession crisis. A quiet war between brothers, between branches of the bloodline, between what the monarchy was and what it was willing to become. And the irony? The more the firm tried to silence the story, the louder it got. Because people weren't just watching this for royal gossip anymore. They were watching it like a mirror, a reflection of who gets included and who gets erased. And Meghan? She hadn't said a word publicly, but behind closed doors, she was watching everything. Every leak, every spin, every contradiction, and waiting. Because sometimes the most powerful move is not to respond. Not yet. Let them bury themselves in their own lies. Let the world see what the crown chooses to protect and what it discards. Because Meghan knew something the palace didn't. Silence may control the moment. But the truth? The truth owns the legacy. But the real twist? While everyone was focused on Charles, William had just made a move of his own. One that could shift the future of the monarchy, and that no one saw coming. While the headlines screamed about Charles and Harry, while leaks flooded tabloids and social media went to war, one man stayed eerily quiet. Prince William. No public statement. No interviews. Not even a royal appearance addressing the controversy. Just a silence so still, it became suspicious. Because silence, in the royal world, is rarely passive. It's a tool, a message, a strategy. And this time, it was part of something much larger. Behind palace walls, William wasn't standing still. He was positioning himself, and those close to him knew it. According to multiple aides, William had been in meetings weeks before George's title announcement. Meetings where he reportedly insisted the timing be moved forward. Originally, the plan had been to wait until George turned 13 to roll out the duchy heir narrative. But William had different ideas. He allegedly told advisors, "The public needs to see who the monarchy belongs to. No ambiguity, no distractions." And distractions? That was code for Harry and Meghan and everything they'd unleashed. Because make no mistake, this wasn't just about George's future. This was about reclaiming the narrative. For years, William had played the long game. While Harry and Meghan fired off interviews, Netflix deals, and memoirs, William kept his head down, smiling, shaking hands, projecting stability. But privately, he was furious, not just at Harry's betrayal, but at how effective it had been. The Oprah interview, the Spotify fallout, the racism accusations, the Meghan tears. Spare. Every time, William stayed quiet, while his image quietly took the hits. And now, with the Queen gone and Charles under fire, William saw his moment. The heir to the throne could no longer afford to be reactive. He had to lead. And what better way to lead than to make Prince George the face of a monarchy reborn? A clean slate, a fresh line, one that didn't include Harry's kids. Some say it was Charles who iced out Archie and Lilibet, but insiders hint that it was William who insisted on the sharp contrast. George in the spotlight, Archie in the shadows. George photographed with his grandfather, Lillibet nowhere to be seen. It was surgical, calculated, and effective, because the public, especially the British public, loves clarity. They don't want chaos. They want tradition, hierarchy, order, and William gave them that, but at a price. Because in shaping the monarchy's future around his son, William had effectively drawn a royal border wall. Those on his side got prestige, protection, and power. Those outside, Harry, Meghan, Archie, Lilibet, got nothing, not even acknowledgment. And here's the kicker. Privately, William didn't even pretend it wasn't personal. Sources close to the Prince of Wales revealed that he believed Harry had humiliated the family, exploited Diana's memory, and used the children as leverage. One aide claimed William referred to Archie's title push as a PR stunt. Let that sink in. To the future king, this wasn't about legacy. It was about image. And the Sussexes? They were bad optics. So William doubled down. He pushed for more public outings with George, more inclusion in royal briefings, subtle PR shifts that framed George as the next generation of stability. And it worked. Approval ratings for George skyrocketed, and no one seemed to notice the quiet absence of his cousins. Or rather, they noticed, but they accepted it, because William had successfully painted Harry's children as outsiders, not by birth, but by choice. And the contradiction? William hated when Harry went public, yet he quietly orchestrated a campaign that made Meghan and Harry look like they were chasing status, while he was the noble protector of the crown. It was masterful, but dangerous, because power plays always come with blowback. And while William polished his public image, he forgot something critical. Harry knew how to fight dirty now, and he was about to reveal a conversation, years old, long buried, never meant to see daylight. That would shatter the image of the perfect big brother forever. A moment of truth William hoped would never resurface. A moment that made Meghan cry. A moment that involved Kate Middleton. And when that bomb dropped, even the palace couldn't protect William anymore. You can silence a son. You can exile a daughter-in-law. You can even erase children from the royal record. But there's one person the monarchy cannot silence. Princess Diana. She may be gone, but her voice, her legacy, her truth, it's still echoing. And now, the people who knew her best, the ones who kept quiet for decades, are finally speaking out. Why? Because when Prince George was given his grand title and Archie and Lilibet were left in the dust, something about the injustice reignited their pain. They saw history repeating itself, again. The same cold calculations, the same quiet cruelty, the same erasure. And this time, it was happening to Diana's grandchildren. One of her closest friends, a woman who shared intimate letters and conversations with the late princess, told a UK paper off the record. Diana would be appalled. She always feared this family would punish her children if they didn't obey. She was right. Another longtime confidant, speaking to an American outlet, went further. She would have protected Archie and Lilibet the way she tried to protect Harry. She hated the system, hated how it picked favorites. This isn't speculation. These were the people who stood beside her in the darkest moments, who held her hand when Charles ignored her, who heard her vent about the firm, the betrayal, the power games. They remember Diana saying, more than once, that Harry needed to carve his own path, that William, while adored by the monarchy, would always be the safe choice. But Harry? Harry had heart, fire, independence, and she feared that would get him punished. Now it had, and her friends couldn't sit back anymore. Because in their eyes, Archie and Lilibet weren't just being excluded, they were being erased from a legacy Diana died protecting. And then came the twist. Because one of these friends, who had kept a handwritten letter from Diana tucked away for nearly 26 years, found something chilling in the lines. It was a letter Diana had written to her friend just months before her death. In it, She talks about the pressure of raising two sons in a broken system, her fears about what they'll do to Harry, and, most hauntingly, her concern that the future heirs will always get protection while the spares are left exposed. Let that sink in. She predicted this exact moment. Prince George, protected, groomed, crowned with titles and press support. Archie and Lilibet, unmentioned, forgotten, frozen out. And here's the most devastating part. Diana knew it would happen, because she lived it. She saw how the crown used affection as a weapon, how it praised one child while punishing the other, how the firm protected the heir at all costs, and blamed everyone else for the fallout. Sound familiar? The tragedy is almost Shakespearean. A woman who fought the system, watching it rise again against her grandchildren. But her friends aren't staying silent. One even hinted that if Harry wanted to, he could release some of Diana's private notes to him, letters she wrote when he was just a teen, expressing her deepest fears about the royal family's intentions. Can you imagine the fallout? The public already sees Diana as the people's princess. If she were shown to have warned Harry of this exact fate, if she had written, in her own hand, that Meghan's children might one day be shunned, it would be a cultural earthquake. Because no matter how hard the palace tries to ignore it, Diana still commands the public's loyalty. She is still the most powerful figure in modern royal history. And now, her voice is back. But the question is, will Harry use it? Because releasing those letters would change everything. It would force the palace to confront a truth they've buried since 1997. But it would also turn this quiet feud into a full-blown royal reckoning. And Harry? He was just days away from making that choice. But first, he had to face something else. Something he'd been dreading. Something from the other side of the family. Because while Diana's allies were stepping up, Meghan's enemies were just getting started. And one of them was about to strike in the most public and profitable way possible. When you back Meghan Markle into a corner, she doesn't retreat. She produces. Because unlike the royals, who communicate through courtiers and carefully worded press briefings, Meghan knows how to control the camera, the edit, the narrative, and she was about to turn silence into spectacle. It started with a call, quiet, strategic, but heavy with tension, to Netflix. No press release, no Instagram teaser, just a private pitch to senior producers who had been waiting, praying, for the next royal scandal to break. And this one was gold. Sources close to Archwell's media team say Meghan didn't want to do another docuseries, not like Harry and Meghan from 2022. That one had been raw, emotional, explosive. This time, she wanted something tighter, more surgical, more damaging. An untitled Archwell project, as one producer called it, focused on legacy, lineage, and the invisible war over royal children. But behind that polished pitch was the real intention. Expose the system. Not just the monarchy. The system that decides which children are crowned and which ones are cast out. Insiders say Meghan floated the idea of including never-before-seen footage of Archie and Lilibet. Birthday parties, home videos, unreleased family moments that would remind the world. These are not PR pawns. They're children, royal children, ignored not because they lacked pedigree, but because their parents dared to walk away. And Netflix? They were all in. Executives saw the numbers spike the moment George's title made headlines. They watched TikTok explode with pro-Sussex content. They knew the public appetite wasn't fading, it was evolving. This wasn't just gossip anymore. It was generational drama. Monarchy versus modernity. And Meghan was holding the detonator. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. The production team reportedly began building an archive timeline, not just of Harry and Meghan's personal footage, but of every major royal milestone since the Queen's death. Side-by-side comparisons. George's coronet ceremony. Archie's conspicuous absence from the Jubilee. Lillibet's edited-out moments from official family montages. All meticulously pieced together. The visual proof of exclusion. And this wasn't some bitter revenge play. Meghan reportedly instructed producers to keep the tone elegant, maternal, and emotionally centered on the kids. No shouting. No takedowns. Just truth. The kind that punches harder than any tabloid headline ever could. And Harry? He hesitated. He knew the risk. Going after the crown again, this time over his children, meant no way back. No secret reconciliation. No private handshakes at Balmoral. This would be nuclear. But then he saw something that changed his mind. According to sources in Montecito, a royal family aide had sent Meghan a cease and desist reminder letter, warning against using any official imagery or suggesting that Archie and Lilibet had been stripped of rights. The timing? Just days after Meghan's pitch meeting with Netflix. Coincidence? Not likely. It was a warning, one last attempt to shut them up. But it backfired, because that letter gave them exactly what they needed, proof that the palace was panicking. And when institutions panic, they make mistakes. So Meghan pushed forward. She personally oversaw the early drafts of the documentary's outline. She tapped in female directors with a track record for emotionally devastating storytelling. She selected a working title that was part poetic, part chilling. Born Royal, Denied by the Crown. Meanwhile, Netflix began re-engaging their PR machine. Whispers started leaking to Hollywood insiders. Paparazzi suddenly spotted Meghan in business meetings again. Archwell trademarks quietly renewed. It was happening. But not everyone was thrilled, because while Meghan was preparing a PR missile, others in the royal world were terrified. And not just at the palace. Across the pond, royal commentators in London began openly speculating. Would Meghan release private emails? Video calls with senior royals? Proof that the exclusion of Archie and Lilibet had been discussed behind closed doors? Because if she had that kind of footage, and all signs said she did, this documentary wouldn't just wound the monarchy. It could bury it. And here's the irony. While the world braced for Meghan's counterattack, the person who stayed completely silent, Kate Middleton, the woman whose children would benefit the most from Archie and Lilibet's erasure, George, Charlotte, Louis, all safely within the royal bubble. No competition, no shared spotlight, just quiet, calculated elevation. And Meghan noticed. She reportedly told a friend, "Funny how Kate's voice only rises when she's playing piano in Westminster Abbey." Ouch. But that wasn't just shade. It was a warning, because Meghan wasn't just coming for the institution. She was coming for everyone who stood by in silence. Everyone who nodded, smiled, curtsied, and quietly let her children be erased. And as the cameras rolled, and the producers edited, and the contracts were finalized, Harry began writing again. Not a book, not a script, but something far more dangerous. A letter, addressed directly to his father. And its contents? They would spark a legal firestorm that not even the palace could contain. At first, it was just anger, disbelief, the sting of betrayal. But for Prince Harry, that wasn't enough anymore. He had tried silence. He had tried diplomacy. He had tried family. Now, he was considering the one move the monarchy never expected. Legal action. Yes, against the crown, against his own father. And while the idea might sound unthinkable, even treasonous to some, in Harry's eyes, it was the only language they understood. The letter, according to multiple sources in Montecito and London, was drafted with the help of top-tier international attorneys. Not just family lawyers, not just PR consultants. This was a legal warning, strategically phrased and ready to detonate. Not a lawsuit, yet, but a formal notification, a line drawn in royal sand. And it centered around one explosive phrase: institutional discrimination and denial of entitlement. Harry's legal team argued that under the legal precedent established by the 1917 Letters Patent, and further strengthened by Queen Elizabeth II's 2012 declaration, Archie and Lilibet were entitled to titles the moment Charles became king. And yet nothing. No public recognition. No ceremony. No formal statement from the crown. Just silence. And then the highly publicized title for Prince George, which, when viewed side by side, painted a picture of selective favoritism that couldn't be ignored. And that was exactly the point of the letter, to force the palace's hand. Because if they responded, they'd have to explain the omission. If they didn't respond, Harry could move forward, publicly, claiming constructive denial. Either way, the crown was cornered. But that wasn't the only thread embedded in the letter. Harry also hinted, very subtly, that he was prepared to release documented proof that the palace had, at one point, considered amending the royal protocol to explicitly block his children from receiving titles. Proof that such conversations were held. Proof that their exclusion wasn't just bureaucratic delay, but intentional. And if that proof surfaced, it wouldn't just be a PR nightmare. It would be a constitutional one. Because monarchy in the UK isn't just symbolic, it's legal. It functions under precedent, law, and inherited rights. denying those rights on arbitrary or prejudiced grounds. That could spark parliamentary inquiry, media firestorms, even questions about the monarchy's future in Commonwealth countries already on the brink of cutting ties. Barbados left the crown in 2021. Jamaica has signaled its next. And if a headline like King Charles accused of discriminatory title denial against biracial grandchildren hits global news cycles, good luck keeping the rest. Even senior aides inside Buckingham Palace reportedly panicked when they heard rumblings of Harry's legal posturing. One insider was quoted saying, "This isn't just a family matter anymore. He's threatening the institution itself." Exactly. Because for Harry, this wasn't about a tiara. It was about principle. His mother had warned him about the darkness inside the palace, the quiet racism, the internal ranking system of who mattered and who didn't. Now, he was watching that very system play out against his children. And while some in the palace dismissed his letter as a legal tantrum, others knew better. They remembered 2020, when Harry filed trademark and intellectual property claims faster than the firm could react. They remembered 2022, when Meghan successfully sued the Mail on Sunday and won. And now, they feared what might come next. Because if Harry filed a formal human rights complaint through international courts, or through the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, he wouldn't need the British legal system at all. He could take the monarchy to global trial and win. But here's where it gets even more terrifying for the firm. If Harry took that route, Meghan could follow. And while she might not be royal anymore, she is a mother. And in the eyes of international law, no institution, no matter how ancient, can erase a child's identity based on politics. That's not protocol. That's prejudice. And Meghan was reportedly ready. Sources say she had already begun consulting with international legal advisors focused on systemic discrimination, title inheritance, and child rights protections. If this case went forward, it wouldn't just be a British tabloid saga. It would become a global civil rights issue. And the press? They'd eat it up. Especially in America, where Meghan and Harry's brand had morphed from royal rebels to righteous reformers. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about crowns and castles. It was about children, identity, power, race. It was about whether modern monarchy could survive modern morality. And Charles? He was cornered. If he gave the titles, he'd look weak. If he refused, he'd look cruel. So what did he do? He went silent. But Harry wasn't done. The letter wasn't just a warning shot. It was a promise. And he wasn't bluffing. Because in his next move, Harry wasn't just going to threaten legal action. He was going to put someone on notice who had remained protected for far too long. Someone whose fingerprints were all over this exclusion. Someone who once called herself a supporter of the next generation. Kate Middleton. And the secret Meghan had kept about her? It was about to come out. To the public, Kate Middleton is flawless. Poised. Elegant. Dutiful. The picture of royal composure. But behind palace walls, that reputation is carefully curated, protected with precision, silence, and strategic positioning. And when the controversy over Archie and Lilibet's exclusion from royal titles exploded across the globe, there was one question few dared to ask out loud. What was Kate's role in all of this? Because make no mistake, this wasn't just a story about Charles and Harry. It was a battle of branches, of futures, of families. And in the battle between the Waleses and the Sussexes, Kate wasn't a bystander. She was a player, and her fingerprints were everywhere. Let's rewind to the months leading up to George's title announcement. Insiders say that during internal meetings on royal protocol, it was Kate who subtly emphasized the need for clarity around future roles. She reportedly urged aides to cement George's position in the public eye, especially as anti-monarchy sentiment was rising in younger demographics. Sounds innocuous enough. But here's the twist. Those same insiders claim Kate specifically asked that George's title be framed as a symbol of renewed stability, one that focused only on the immediate working family, not extended branches, not California, not Sussex. And it didn't stop there. In a private meeting with senior press advisors, one royal source alleges Kate posed a rhetorical question that raised eyebrows. How can we promote cohesion if the messaging is still divided between two families? Translation? It's time to move forward, without Harry and Meghan. It was subtle, it was polite, but it was surgical. Because while Kate was advocating for her son to take his rightful place in the royal spotlight, she was also reinforcing a quiet truth the crown didn't want to say aloud. Archie and Lilibet were no longer considered part of the family's future. And Meghan? She noticed. According to a friend close to her inner circle, Meghan was deeply hurt by Kate's silence during the entire title debacle. Not because she expected support, but because Kate had once promised something very different. Back when Meghan first married Harry, sources say Kate extended an olive branch, whispered reassurances, even reportedly told Meghan over tea, "Your children will always be seen as royal. That's not something anyone can take away." That quote stuck with Meghan. So when the palace made George's elevation a global event and erased her children without a word, Meghan saw Kate's silence for what it was: complicity. And it wasn't just silence. In the days following the announcement, Kate appeared publicly at several events, smiling, waving, even giving a brief statement about how proud she was of George. But not once did she acknowledge the growing media storm surrounding Archie and Lilibet. And that, Meghan reportedly said, was the final betrayal. Because for all the tension between the brothers, Meghan once believed that she and Kate had at least one thing in common: motherhood. She believed that no matter the drama, no matter the headlines, a mother would never stand by while two innocent children were sidelined. But she was wrong, and it stung. Insiders claim Meghan confided to a close friend that Kate had chosen her team long before this latest scandal, long before the title wars. And now, she was protecting her legacy, her children, by distancing herself from Meghan's. And the proof? Look no further than the family photo releases. In every image, every royal montage, every video tribute to Queen Elizabeth or King Charles's reign, George, Charlotte, and Louis appear front and center. Archie and Lilibet? Absent. Even in presentations about the monarchy's next generation, there's no mention of the Sussex children. And who oversees many of those initiatives? Kate. As a senior working royal and future queen consort, she sits on multiple committees and influences how the royal narrative is shaped. So while she doesn't need to make executive decisions, her influence is undeniable. And Meghan? She's had enough. Insiders say she's now planning to address this in her upcoming Netflix project, not directly, not by name, but through theme, by exploring how powerful women can use silence as a weapon, how maternal instincts can be politicized, how exclusion often wears pearls and a polite smile. Because while the media paints Meghan as the disruptor and Kate as the angelic constant, the reality is more complicated. Kate plays the game exceptionally well. She doesn't need to leak. She doesn't need to lash out. She just steps aside and lets the system do the dirty work. And when the dust clears, her children are untouched. Her image is gleaming. And her sister-in-law? Erased. But that strategy is starting to backfire. Because the public is watching more closely now. And Meghan's team is quietly preparing a new narrative. One that doesn't pit Duchess against Duchess, but instead asks a deeper question. When did protecting your own children become an excuse to discard someone else's? And if that question takes root, Kate's silence won't be seen as elegance. It'll be seen as endorsement. And the royal family? They'll have to answer for it. But just when it seemed like the war of words had reached its peak, one image, one seemingly innocent royal photo, pushed everything over the edge. And it happened on Christmas Eve. It looked harmless at first glance. A warm holiday snapshot. Cozy, polished, festive. Just another curated glimpse into royal life. Red velvet chairs, twinkling lights, carefully coordinated outfits, and proud parents smiling beside their beautifully dressed children. But beneath the glitter and garland of the official Christmas Eve photo released by Buckingham Palace, something felt wrong. Terribly wrong. Because as the world admired Prince George's confident pose, Princess Charlotte's poised smile, and Prince Louis's cheeky grin, eagle-eyed viewers quickly noticed who was not present. Again, Archie and Lilibet. Not even a framed photo on the mantle. Not a stocking in the corner. Not a single token of their existence in the shot. Just nothing. And that silence? It was deafening. This wasn't a group photo from a larger family gathering. This was the photo. The royal family's official image of 2025. The image that would grace newspapers, beamed across television broadcasts, embedded into the public memory for decades. And just like every other major royal moment that year, Archie and Lilibet were absent. Not by accident, by choice, by design. Within hours of the photo's release, social media imploded. Hashtags like hashtag Invisible Royals and hashtag Not Their Christmas Too began trending. Influencers dissected every inch of the photo. Where were Harry and Meghan? Where were their children? Had they been invited to any holiday events? The answer? No. Multiple sources confirmed the Sussexes were not included in any of the palace's Christmas planning. No formal invitation to Sandringham. No mention of a Zoom call with Charles. No coordination with the press office to include even a virtual nod to the California branch of the family. It was as if they'd vanished. And for Harry, this photo was the final gut punch. Sources say he stared at the image for nearly an hour, zooming in, zooming out, searching for any sign that his children were still part of this family. A candle, a small portrait, a keepsake on the shelf. There was nothing. And then, something else hit him. In the background of the photo, displayed subtly, almost too subtly, was a shadowed image of Queen Elizabeth with all of her great-grandchildren. All except two. You guessed it, Archie and Lilibet. That one detail, one frame, unleashed a rage in Harry that